which of course he didn't write. You could say that the entire Tanny show is a kind of a more detailed explication from the Shin point of view of that particular aphorism.
Morning, everyone.
Just to give a quick example from the Tanny show. So section 9, although I say the Nembutsu, I rarely experience joyful happiness.
Everybody hear me?
Nor do I
okay?
have the desire to immediately go to the Pure Land. I'm going to start out
should be done
this
about
talk
this,
with then he
an
responded,
aphorism
I,
from
Shinran, have been having the same
Czechoslovakian
question also,
Jewish writer
and
Franz
now
Kafka.
you have the same thought.
The true way goes over a rope,
When I carefully consider
which
the
is
matter,
not stretched at
my
any
birth
great
in the
height,
Pure Land is settled
but
without
just above
doubt,
the ground.
for the very reason that I
It
do
seems
not
more designed
rejoice
to make people
at that
stumble
which should have me
than to be
bursting with
walked
joy.
upon.
It is the working of blind passion.
This is a
which
quote that I think
suppresses the
a
heart
lot now in
which
terms of my
that
own
would
practice.
rejoice and prevents its fullest expression these days. All this the Buddha already knew. Sometimes when all this foolish being shared with people, they seem to feel that when we realize that the compassionate vow of other power is for beings like ourselves reading, the vow becomes even more underlining and certain and dependable. The working of blind passion also
Peculiar
causes us
relationship
not to want to
we
go
have
to the Pure
with
Land
the,
and makes us feel uneasy, worrying about death when we become even slightly ill. Impossible, it seems, to leave this old house of agitation, where we have wandered aimlessly since the beginning of time. Nor can we long for the Pure Land of peace, which we have yet to know. This is due to blind passion so truly powerful and overwhelming. But no matter how reluctant we may be, when our life in this world comes to an end beyond our control, then for the first time we go to the land of fulfillment. Those who do not want to go immediately are the special concern of true compassion. For this very reason, the vow of true compassion is completely dependable, and our birth in the Pure Land is absolutely certain. If our hearts were filled with joyful happiness, and we desired to go swiftly to the Pure Land, we might be misled and suspect that perhaps we are free of blind passion. So I was thinking about this, the other day. I was listening to Reverend Ron, who's been conducting his teaching sessions on Zoom, and he went through this thing of kind of showing how our agency is completely sort of frustrated by the teachings. He really did a good job. I was very impressed at how he kind of frustrated our sense of agency. I thought, that's very good. But I was thinking, that when he was saying it, he was also talking about doing good and things like that, and how we are very limited in our abilities to do good, and that indeed our good is always poison good, as Shinran said. It's poisoned by our particular desires to do things that we think are good, and irrespective of taking into full consideration what the actual situation may be. And I've been sort of thinking about that a lot, because we're in a situation now in our country and in the world where there's a lot of social strife. And during periods of social strife, the desire there's always clashes of values then. And so the desire to do good, or the insistence on doing good and to fight evil is very, very present in a way that in more peaceful times and in more normal times is not the case. Most of the time, we don't consider ethical things because it's not necessary. but during these sorts of times we do. So I was thinking that I would kind of talk a bit about what Shinran's view of ethics. Mentioned very much, but he did have very definite views on it. He had what is sometimes referred to as a negative ethics. In other words, he had a firm sense of what we ought not to do, but what we should do was kind of sort of more open, not clearly addressed. And I'm going to read a couple of passages. The first one here is from the Matosho, which were letters that Shinran wrote to, when he was in Kyoto, to followers in the Kanto district where he had lived for a long time. Maddened beyond control by blind passion, we do things we should not and say things we should not. But if a person is deceitful in his relations with others, doing what he should not and saying what he should not because he thinks it will not hinder his birth, then it is not an instance of being maddened by passion. Since he purposely does these things, they are simply misdeeds which should never have been done. It is deplorable that you have told people to abandon themselves to their heart's desires and to do anything they want. One must seek to cast off the evil of this world and to cease doing wretched deeds. This is what it means to reject the world and live the Nembutsu. And then he goes on, birth into the Pure Land has nothing whatsoever to do with the calculation of foolish beings. Since it is completely entrusted to the primal vow of the Buddha, it is indeed other power. It is ridiculous to try to calculate it in various ways. So this was, variations of this were repeated in some other areas, but this was pretty much what he had to say about good and bad and how that is to be handled. And it's a kind of negative ethics. Over the last months, I've been kind of reading a book entitled The Moral Fool, which is a critique of too much reliance upon ethics. And while it does not quote Shinran or anything like that, it does quote various Taoist and Chinese Zen Buddhist teachers and things like this. And in one part of the book, he lists 4 kinds of negative ethics. And the one in which, I'm not going to read all 4. If anybody's curious, I'll be happy to do that afterwards. I don't want to go too far in the weeds. But the one that seems to fit Shinran is a normative ethics that assumes that the good as such cannot be determined and that therefore can only be explained negatively, analogous to the attempts of negative theology to define God. It's not quite Shinran's position, but it's close, it's the closest one that he lists. One of the things that he goes on to say in the book, which is one of the central theses of the book, which I think has, as I say, some relevance to our situation now. He goes on to say the specific problem with ethics is that it can lead to pathological states. It potentially leads to dangerous one-sidedness or self-righteousness. If one starts to conceive of oneself and others in ethical terms, then one is easily driven to look at the world in terms of black and white, of friends and enemies. Ethical distinctions can pose a serious threat to the harmonious coexistence of that which is distinct. If one conceives of oneself and others merely as different or even opposite, this is not necessarily antagonistic. If, however, distinction becomes moral distinction, then the possibility for conflict looms. It transforms fruitful and productive distinctions into destructive hostilities, which I think is a good description of what's happening now. So going back to Shinran, the one positive thing that he did say, in terms of a more positive position about ethics, is once again, this is from the Tanny Show. Once true and trusting is settled, we realize that since our birth is due to the working of Amida, it is not due to our calculation. Even though we do evil, we should even more think of the power of the vow. Then the thought of tenderness and forbearance will become manifested by virtue of made to become so by itself. When I do not contrive, it is called made to become so by itself. This is none other than other power. Let's see. So right now, one of the more positive things happening as a result of this situation is the people here in Minnesota and in other states that have been harassed by federal agents. People are forming mutual aid societies. They are giving people rides, Everyone I talk to who is even slightly involved in this, including myself, their main concern is that they don't feel they're doing enough, and I certainly share that. That is a very excellent, and kind of wonderful thing to see in the midst of all of this. And I think that a distinction between a kind of ethics which promotes in its extreme self-righteousness and division, there's another kind of ethics, and I'm going to read something from Dharma Chatter by Reverend Masao Kodani, and it's a chapter called Right and Wrong. This subtle and important view of right and wrong is vital to the Buddhist view of human communities. He's referring to a poem that was on top by Kim Sakat, the vagabond poet. Since right and wrong are not things ordained by a God who created us, Buddhists have the much more difficult task of determining for themselves what is right and wrong in their relations to other beings. The number of absolute rights and absolute wrongs in this world can be written on a quarter of a grain of rice. This does not mean, however, that we can therefore do anything our ego desires to do, since everything is relative. God-centered religions often claim that without at least a fundamental set of absolute rights and wrongs, our society would fall into chaos. We are told that without a clear-cut set of rules of right and wrong, we would soon be at each other's throats. This view leads to a reliance on laws and rights to keep society harmonious and its citizens safe. America is a nation whose greatness rests in large part on laws and the rights of its citizens. For all the guarantees, however, it has not resulted in a society that offers its citizens safety. The laws are clear, and we have an enormous number of lawyers whose job it is to help clarify the laws for us and to assure us of our rights, yet we remain a violent people with unequal protection under the law. The Buddhist, Confucian, and Taoist traditions emphasize man's obligations to other men and to other beings. We do not have the right to kill, steal, or lie because everyone else doesn't. We have the obligation not to kill, steal, or lie, even if everyone else does. And this is not because a God told us to do so, but because not to do so brings suffering upon ourselves and everyone else. The obligation is not a decree, but a conclusion reached upon seeing into the true nature of our being. We are obliged to discourage self-centeredness in ourselves and in others, and the rules we observe to help us achieve this depend upon time, place, and circumstance. Flexibility leads to resilience. Inflexibility leads to breakage. We must not, however, confuse flexibility with self-centered opportunism as the, quote, tough guys who can deal with the dog-eat-dog world out there, end quote, so often do. Bending is not lying flat on your back. It is simply bending. Those who do not like to bend insist on either standing ramrod straight or flat on one's back. It is better to learn to just bow and consequently never break. And so with that, I think I'm finished talking. And as always, thank you for your patience.